everybody. I'm very excited that we're going to be looking at the book of Judges. Here, let me, are you going to sit? Yeah, you can sit closer to the screen, I think is a good idea.
Very good idea.
All right. All right, so there we go. Now I'm going to share the screen. So let me just say, I'll say a few things about the book of Judges before we get started, just to sort of set it a little bit into context. And then we will get to reading it. So what I've done, what I thought we would do is that we would read the first section of the book. The book of Judges divides up, according to the scholars that I looked at, it divides into three different sections. The first section is the first two chapters plus a little bit of the third, and that's really an introduction. And it sort of sets it in context. And it also tries to sort of make sense of the question that we had all during our conversation about the book of Joshua, which was, what's up with this contradiction, right? We have a kind of a contradiction that the Israelites are told that they need to go into the land of Canaan and they need to wipe everybody out, right?
Uncomfortable.
Right, it's a very uncomfortable command, right? But then on the other hand, it turns out that again and again, we learn that they actually didn't do it, right? That the people of the land, a really significant chunk of them stayed there, right? And continued to live, right? So this was obviously sort of a kind of contested memory, so to speak.
Or a contradiction.
What's the contradiction?
Yeah.
The contradiction is, on one hand, it said that the Israelites went in and they got rid of everyone who was there, right?
That means they killed them.
You may remember, Sandy, the first couple chapters of the book of Joshua, right? It talks about all the kings that they killed, that they destroyed, and and that everything went really, really well. And then there was the rest of the book of Joshua, right, which was about, well, actually they didn't kill everybody, right? And so I mean, I think it's something and it really makes a lot of sense in the context of what scholars think about, well, what was the reality of Israelite society, right? Most likely there was some group that came from Egypt with this story of the Exodus, right? But many of the tribes probably were already in Canaan, right? So there's a way in which people struggle over history to make sense of their own lives, right? And so that's the first thing to remember about the book of Judges, and this is true of the Bible as a whole, right? We can't look at the Bible as history the way we would read a book of history, right? Thinking that these people have sort of looked at all kinds of various accounts of what happened, right? And are making a best judgment about what they think happened, right? The Bible actually very often will present different accounts of the same event multiple times, right? All with a different sort of angle, and very often from different eras, right? That suggests, right, that there was that they had different agendas at different times. So the book of Judges is no different. So the first 2.5 chapters is this introduction, right? And we'll have a look at it. But a lot of what it's about, right, is, well, what happened, right? We had this triumphant arrival into the land of Canaan, right? We knocked down the walls of Jericho. We conquered this one. We conquered that one, right? And everyone was in really good shape in their relationship with God. And already, right, by the second chapter of the book of Judges, we are all worshiping, the Baalim, the sort of fertility gods, the Ashtaroth, right, and the nature gods, and so on and so forth. We're worshiping idols, right? And we're not even a chapter in, right? And that's sort of that's the overall story of the book of Judges, right? Which happens again and again in cycles, right? The Israelites misbehave. They marry in with the local inhabitants. They start worshiping those gods, right? Then God gets angry at them, and so some external force takes power and oppresses them. Then God hears their cries, right? And sends a shofet, right? A shofet is it's a judge, right? Although really it's a leader, right? Judges is the traditional title for it. But by and large, we can say that the shoftim are not just judges in the way that we think of judges sitting on a bench with a funny wig, right? They're more, and many of them are military people, right? And we have a very famous Deborah, right, as one of the judges, and they come along, and until the end of the judge's life, things are good, right? Then that judge dies, and the whole cycle starts over again. All right, so it's very interesting how this sort of the books works this way. All right, so let's. Does anyone have any questions about this sort of introductory little piece? All right, so let's start. I think actually we'll start with a little bit of a midrash actually. Okay, all right. So here's the midrash. Can you guys read that, or should I make it bigger? I think I'll make it bigger.
We're not screen sharing, you know.
No, I know.
Oh, no, we can't see it. You were talking to us.
I'm not screen sharing yet. I'm
Okay, good, because I can't see it.
Yeah.
I need it bigger.
Make it as big as possible. All right, and then I'm going to share it because that way I will get it right. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right, good deal. So we're starting with the midrash on Ruth. Now, why would we start with the midrash on Ruth? Right? Who knows the order of the Bible in the Jewish tradition? Right? It's Joshua, Judges, and then what comes next? There we go. Okay, so David doesn't necessarily know the Hebrew Bible, but he knows the Catholic Bible, right? So Joshua, Judges, Ruth, right? Why does Ruth come in the third position of the former prophets when we're talking about the Christian Bible? Is because of the first line in the book of Ruth, right? Vayahi bimei shefot hashoftim, vayahi ra'av ba'aretz, right? In the days when the chieftains chiefed, right? Or in the more traditional translation, could you read that? You have a more traditional oh no, you don't, but you don't have Ruth. Okay, so in the more traditional translation, right? It's in the days when the judges judged. All right. Now, the thing about this, right, is that as you may know, the rabbis, when they were doing their midrash, right, they were not always limited by the they were not limited, right, by the vowel sounds necessarily that are found in the Masoretic text. Many of the midrashim happened before that, right? So Vayahi bimei shefot hashoftim, right? I think they probably read it as shefut hashoftim or something like this. They read it as in the days when the judges were judged. It's very different, right? And what do they say about it? They say, woe, v'oy l'dor sheshoftav tzrichin lehishafet, right? Woe to a generation that judges as judges, and woe to a generation whose judges need to be judged, right? Because it says in our book that we're reading right now, and they didn't listen to their judges, right? Who were those judges? Very interesting, right? Barak and Deborah. So the judges, the ones who really get the designation of judge, really just Barak and Devorah, right? Really just one story, right? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, no, they were Shamgar and Ehud. Those are the first two judges and two of the most violent. Well, Samson is obviously the most violent. Ehud and Shmagar are pretty violent too. And Rav Huna said, no, they were Devorah, Barak, and Yael. So Yael is in another story, right, the story of Sisera. She's connected with the story of Barak and Deborah. So they're going to say, you know, that is the story of Devorah, Barak, and Yael, who's not even Jewish, right, that is the quintessential judges story. So as we read through the stories of the judges, you'll get a sense of, well, what do you think? Who are really the judges, right? Which ones are the worthwhile judges? For the ones who were failures ultimately, right? All right. Many of them were. Well, it depends, right? And this is actually ascension, right? Is it the Barak Devorah Yael story, right? Which is about a battle with Deborah and Barak liberate the Israelites from an evil general, right? Or is it Ehud and Shamgar who do a very similar thing, right? But much more individually, shall we say? So we'll see. Right. So when they don't heed their chieftains, right? Vagam el shoftehem lo shameu. They did not heed their chieftains either. They went astray after other gods and bowed down to them. They were quick to turn aside from the ways their father had followed in obedience to the commandments of the Lord. They did not do right. And then another one about this. Well, let's read a little bit of the book of. Let's read a little bit of the book of Judges, and we'll get a sense of what we're doing with that. Let me see if I can find it here. I had it just a minute ago. There it is. It's amazing. It's so different. It is so different. All right, so here we go. Let's see here. I'm going to do, I think I'm going to do this. Nope. I'm going to do this. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try to really, nope, I don't want to do that. Guess I'm stuck. Okay, I guess we'll go back to it over there. Okay. All right. All right, so everybody can see this. All right, so here's Judges chapter 1. And it came to pass after the death of Joshua that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall go up for us first against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have delivered the land into his hand. So very interesting, right? Joshua has died. And it's not clear at this point who is going to be the leader, or even which group will be the head group. So it turns out that God decides that it should be Judah. Now it's worth asking the question, I think, how do they figure this out? Right? Go ahead.
There's a whole explanation.
Yeah.
Going to these breastplates.
Yes.
The light,
Right.
this,
Right.
that.
Right.
Fascinating.
It is fascinating. Right.
All the stones
Right.
representing tribes.
Right. So this is actually how they do it, and it's funny because there's a midrash. People who studied the book of Joshua will remember Achan, right? The guy who stole the gold from I think from Jericho. I forget where, from one of the cities.
Yeah.
And they figure out who it was by lots,
Yeah.
right? And the midrash says that when they came to him, he said to them, you're just slandering me. It's not me, right? How can you prove it, right? And then the stone that's on the breastplate, there's 12 stones, one for each, right?
Tetragrammaton.
Yeah, oh, yeah. There's 12 stones, one for each of the tribes, and Achan was a member of the tribe of Judah, and Judah's stone lost its luster, and then that's when he admitted it, right? Because God, that's the way that God was telling him. So it is very interesting, right, that they have this. They have to figure out, though, right? The rabbis have to come up with this method, right, for God to communicate, because there's no Joshua anymore.
But it's like magic.
It is a little bit like magic. It's a little troubling, right?
Rabbi Jim, when
Yeah.
you get a question or a comment from the people in the room there,
You can't hear it.
we don't hear it. So
Oh,
you're having a private conversation with them, but we're left out.
Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can figure this out.
I don't see the advantage of having people in the room. Do you,
It's
Sandy?
ridiculous.
It makes no sense. It's not working.
Let's
It's not
see.
working for us.
Hello?
Of course it's not. And he's always in the midst of getting it to work, and he never
Well,
does.
they're trying for the first time this experiment, I think, with people on Zoom and with people in the room, but I don't think it's working to have a mixed group like this. I don't see the advantage.
Hello?
And it should have been prepared.
Well, he's
No,
trying
it
it,
should
but
have been.
I
Or
just don't
try.
see, I just think it's more work. It's harder for him. It's more distracting for him to take care of two different groups at the same time.
They don't have to do it.
No, I'll just
Not do it.
I'll just tell them. I'll just tell them.
Because they're frustrated. That's not.
Nothing ever seems to work. Okay. All right, so yeah, so I was hoping that the microphone would pick up. It's not. We're hopefully getting a system where the microphone will work. I will pick up myself a microphone so that it'll be more helpful.
Well,
but-
meanwhile, if you just repeat the question, you don't need any more equipment, you know.
That's what I'm gonna do, yeah.
But meanwhile, I just wonder, or we're wondering, what's the advantage of having people in the room and people on Zoom at the same time? It seems to be a distraction for you. It's harder for you to deal with two different groups.
I mean, I will say that I'm asking everybody to be indulgent.
Yeah, we'll try it. Just
as
it
we,
seems like it's harder for you.
Well, I mean, but my experience is that every change that I've made in terms of these programs, every shift in venue, every shift in technology has been a challenge, and we've generally overcome the challenges. The first couple of times, it's hard,
Okay.
and we'll get used to it. And I mean, I think
Why, in light of the fact that rates are going up, are we having these group sessions upstairs? It seems to me absurd.
it's a good question, Sandy. I think
It's not a question, it's a comment.
Okay, thank you. Don't have to answer. All right, so what Connie asked, well, what Connie said, I said, how are they talking to the Lord? Right? How is God communicating with the Israelites? And Connie mentioned, right, that the high priest wears a breastplate that has 12 stones. Each of them represents one of the tribes of Israel, right? And so when they ask that question, right, it's a little bit like the reverse of an array on an elevator, right? What floor do you want to go to? You push the button for the floor. Right? In this case, they ask, well, which of the tribes should be the first ones to go in? And God answers by lighting up Judah's stone. That is clearly a midrash. That's not what's in the Bible. But
Which tribe should go in where?
Well, so that's the next question, Jeannie. It's a brilliant question. Didn't we already do this? Right?
It's not a brilliant question. I just don't know what we're talking about.
And what's interesting is that I didn't do extensive research on this, but I did some, and I couldn't find anything that really addressed this. Wait, didn't we have a whole process of entering the land of Canaan before Joshua died? Right? Very interesting, right? So in a sense, this is kind of replay almost of the conquest of the land of Canaan. Right. And so, what's really important to understand is that from the perspective of the person writing this little introductory piece, right, Judah is the hero, right? Judah is in the right, and the rest of the Israelites will be in the wrong, right? And so let's go through it, and we can sort of see why that is, right? So Judah said to Shimon his brother, "Come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go with thee into thy lot." So Shimon went with him, right? So Judah and Simon have this connection, right? And Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they smote of them in Bezek 10,000 men. And they found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek, and they fought against him, and they smote the Canaanites and the Perizzites. But Adoni-Bezek fled, and they pursued after him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and great toes.
Oh, very nice.
Oh, terrible, right? And then
But that happens all through the thing.
Of course it does. And look at what Adoni-Bezek says. Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings, having their thumbs and their great toes cut off, gathered food under my table. As I have done, so God hath requited me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. All right, so note that he goes to Jerusalem. So they actually, Bible scholars think that Bezek, his name is not Adoni-Bezek, but Adoni-Tzedek, who is the king of Jerusalem, right? And that he runs away from Jerusalem, and they find him in Bezek, and that's where they smack him. And then his servants bring him back to Jerusalem, and he dies in Jerusalem.
Did we encounter him before in Joshua or something? I don't know. I remember commenting on the Hebrew name. He was a Canaanite, seemed to have a Hebrew name.
Exactly. I don't remember exactly, Jeannie, but that does sound right. And also, there was also Melchizedek, right, who is the king of Shalem in the book of Genesis, right, who encounters Abraham. And so the rabbis, of course, would not make much of a distinction between a Canaanite that was found in the days of Abraham and a Canaanite that was found in the times of Joshua. They would imagine that he lived the whole time.
But you say his name is Adoni-Bezek, but it's really Adoni-Tzedek. How do you know that?
That is a scholarly guess. So people who are much smarter than I am, as regards these questions, have suggested that he was actually the king of Jerusalem. Okay. All right, and then the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem. Very interesting. They fought against Jerusalem and took it and smote it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. So this is very interesting, right? Because we will see even later, I don't know if it's in this chapter or the next chapter, we'll see that the Israelites were not actually able to conquer Jerusalem, and Jerusalem does not become an Israelite city until the time of David, right? Which we've been learning about in the book of Samuel. Okay, and afterward, the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites that dwelt in the hill country and in the south and in the lowland. And Judah went against the Canaanites that dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron before time was Kiryat Arba, and they smote Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai. Okay, so later in this, I think, and still in this chapter, we'll learn that these three are the Anakites. The Anakites are the giants, and we remember them. If you remember the story of the spies from the book of Numbers, right? You'll remember that the spies come back and they say to Moses and to the rest of the people, "Oh my God, there were these huge guys there. There were giants. We can't go there." So now they have names: Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. Right, and from there he went against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir before time was Kiryat Sefer. which Kiryat Sefer is actually a town north of Haifa now, so. who
And
knows?
Kiryat Arba is also a
Yes, and
keyword
that's
for
near there
something.
too, exactly. But Hebron is definitely different, right? And Debir is probably not near Haifa either. All right, and Caleb said, he that smiteth Kiryat Sefer and taketh it, to him will I give Achsah, my daughter, to wife. All right, so if you were studying the book of Joshua with us, you'll remember this story, right? This is one of those repeats. And Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, or younger kinsman, according to the more modern translation, took it, and he gave him Achsah, his daughter, to wife. And it came to pass, when she came unto him, that she moved him to ask of her father a field. And she alighted from off her ass, and Caleb said unto her, What wouldst thou? And she said unto him, Give me a blessing, for that thou hast set me in Southland, and give me therefore springs of water. Actually, she basically says, you gave me away, so give me something in return for having given me away. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the nether springs. Okay. So we have this repetition from the book of Joshua about Othniel and Caleb, right? And Caleb's wife, who, again, like, we see these little snippets, right, of female characters exerting their influence. Okay, so, and the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, very interesting, right? Moses' father-in-law, right? That's Jethro, right? The father of Zipporah. And so very interesting that he's mentioned here. I don't think that he's mentioned in the book. I don't remember him in the book of Joshua. Went up out of the city of palm trees with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which is in the south of Arad, and they went and dwelt with the people. And Judah went with Shimon his brother, and they smote the Canaanites that inhabited Zephath and utterly destroyed it. The name of the city was called Hormah. Hormah means utterly destroyed. And Judah took Gaza with the border thereof, and Ashkelon with the border thereof, and Ekron with the border thereof. Now, this is also really interesting, right? Because these three cities are three of the cities of the Philistines, right? The nation states of the Philistines, or the city states of the Philistines. And again, they are presented as not having been conquered by the Israelites again until the time of David, right? So this feels like it's not even trying, right, to be an accurate historical representation, or it's being very, what's the word? It's being very tendentious, right, in assigning to Judah all of the accomplishments that came later, right? To make the point, right, that Judah was effective, and Judah did banish all the people that were living there earlier, and that will be a contrast with the northern tribes. Okay, and the Lord was with Judah, and he drove out the inhabitants of the hill country, for he could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron unto Caleb, and as Moses had spoken, and he drove out thence the three sons of Anak. So the three sons of Anak, right, the Anakites, those are the three guys whose name we just learned. The scholars also say that in verse 18, where it says also Judah took Gaza, that probably that other ancient versions have, and Judah did not take Gaza, right, which would make it consistent with what happens later in terms of the book of Samuel, and also with this line here, right, that he could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley. Gaza is the valley. So I don't know. But this is obviously, when you're dealing with ancient texts, you can always get into arguments about what they were reading. Okay, so go ahead. Connie's going to ask a question. I will repeat it.
Okay.
So the place names here, do you assume that they're the same location as Gaza and Hebron and Ashkelon today?
I think some of them you can. I think some of them you can. And
Settlers of Ashkelon just look in here and decide to take that name.
yeah, no, I think, well, Ashkelon is near Gaza. right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that a lot of them, you can assume that there's some connection, right? Others of them, like we were just talking about Kiryat Sefer and Kiryat Arba, which are towns near Haifa, it's very unlikely that those towns were there, especially since Kiryat Arba was actually Hebron. So, but it's a good question, but that's a question for, you know, a geography scholar more than for me. But I do have a, in a minute, I do have a, if I can figure it out, I have a map that I can show you. Yeah.
I thought Ashkelon was in Lebanon. I thought you said it was Philistine, not north.
Ashkelon, the city of Ashkelon is just north of the Gaza Strip,
Oh, well, then I'm wrong.
as far as I remember. Is that right,
Maybe I'm wrong.
Ronnie? Yeah.
So,
Maybe I'm wrong.
All right. So, did I ever repeat your question?
No,
No.
we don't know what the question was.
The question was, can we assume that the names of the place names here are consistent with place names in modern times? And the answer is sometimes yes, and sometimes no. And you know, you can't always know for sure. Sometimes it just makes sense that Gaza is Gaza, right? Gaza is the coastal plain, you know, to the west of Jerusalem, you know. So yeah, that's probably Gaza. All right. And here we go, right? Remember before that Judah had destroyed Jerusalem, but in verse 21, and the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day. So you can see that there's contradictions here, even within this very chapter. And the house of Joseph. So in the house of Joseph, of course, we don't have a tribe Joseph. We have a tribe Ephraim and a tribe of Manasseh, right? But the house of Joseph, I think, here represents the northern tribes as a collective, right? And they went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph sent a spy out Bethel. Now the name of the city before time was Luz. And the watchers saw a man come forth out of the city. And they said unto him, show us, we pray thee, the entrance to the city, and we will deal kindly with thee. And he showed them the entrance into the city, and they smote the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man go and all his family. And the man went into the land of the Hittites and built a city, and called the name thereof Luz, which is the name thereof unto this day. So here's the situation, right, where the Bible is saying, well, the city of Luz kind of moved, right? And the old city of Luz is now Bethel. Now, very interesting, right, that this is we can see the parallel structure here, right? The first little bit about Judah is their fight with Adoni Bezek, right? And they're successful. Their successful military campaign, right? And they are ruthless, right, with the king. Here, right, we have this now fairly standard spy story, which we see in the beginning of the second chapter of the book of Joshua, and we just read another one like this in the book of Samuel. And we see that, you know, that this is fairly common. We let the people go, right, if they spy for us. Well, anyway, but this seems to indicate that there's a difference between the northern tribes and the southern tribes, right? That there's a ruthlessness of the southern tribes that God appreciates, and a kind of a mercy exhibited by the northern tribes that eventually God is not happy with.
The Israelites did not mutilate, except for here, when they cut off the toes.
Right. By and large, I don't remember that as a.
But it was the custom of all the.
It was the custom of the area, right? Yeah. So, and now we'll see, right, that Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and its towns, nor of Tanakh and its towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and its towns, nor the inhabitants of Iblim and its town, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and its towns, but the Canaanites were resolved to dwell in that land. And it came to pass when Israel was waxen strong that they put the Canaanites to task work but did in no wise drive them out. Okay? So very interesting, right? The Judahites drive out the original residents, and the Israelites in the north do not, right? And Ephraim drove not out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. Zebulun drove not out the inhabitants of Kitron, nor the inhabitants of Nahalol, but the Canaanites dwelt among them and became tributary. Asher drove not out the inhabitants of Akko, nor the inhabitants of Zidon, nor of Achlab, nor of Achzib, nor of Helba, nor of Afik, nor of Rehob. But the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Naphtali drove not out the inhabitants of Beit Shemesh, nor the inhabitants of Beit Anan, but he dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beit Shemesh and Beit Anath became tributary unto them. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the hill country, for they would not suffer them to come down to the valley. Right? So the Amorites actually defeat the invading Danites. But the Amorites were resolved to dwell in Har-Heres, in Ai-Halon, and in Shalbim, yet the hand of the house of Joseph prevailed, so that they became tributary. So the Danites are chased away, right? Eventually, the Amorites are subjugated by the house of Joseph, but they are not driven away. And the border of the Amorites was from the ascent of Akrabim, from Selah and upward. Okay.
Is this just, sorry.
That's okay.
Is this just the way it was, and not in history, but I mean, that it's saying, this is what happened. These people did this, but they were tributary after that.
Right.
So that was good that they were.
Well, that's really interesting, actually. It really is an interesting question. So the question is this the way is the text basically positing that this is the way it was, right? And was it a good thing that these guys, that the Canaanites and the other tribes that were subjugated, was it a good thing that they were subjugated, right? And I would say that, first of all, I think the point that chapter is making, right, is that the Judahites did it right and the Israelites did it wrong, right? So when we're talking about the Israelites, we're talking about the northern tribes, right? And the Judahites are the southern tribes. And so this is the chapter that's written from a Judahite perspective, right? Someone who thinks that, that in the battle between Judah and Israel, this is on the Judah side, right? I'm not to what degree it accords at all with reality.
Yeah, I know that.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But
I think
I get a lot out of what you do.
right, but I think that the answer to your question, is it a good thing that they're tributary, right? I think the answer is no, right? I think that that's seen as a sin.
Oh,
Okay.
that's what I wanted to know.
Right. That's seen in this chapter as a sin, right? We would consider it less terrible, right, to put someone into forced labor than to destroy them all, right? But in this sort of perspective, right? Oh, what happened, right? Probably what the scholars that I read said, probably this chapter was written after the fall of the northern kingdom, right? And Judah is trying to make sense of why that happened, right? Why did it happen? It's because all those northerners, right, let all those Canaanites stick around, right? That was the problem.
And it says also briefly, they put them to task for it.
Right,
So like building roads, labor maybe.
right. What Connie just said is that they basically made them slaves, right? They forced labor on them. And what occurred to me, right, is that it's such an irony, right, that the Israelites who escaped from slavery in Egypt turned around and enslaved the people that they found in the place where they came to live, right? I'm not sure that irony was meaningful, because I'm not sure that slavery itself was seen as evil, just the abuse of slaves was seen as bad. All right, so let's continue with chapter 2. Any questions over there in Dinesh? Did I lose everybody?
Are they still there?
I don't know. We lost Sandy. We lost Sandy. I guess she was upset. All right, but we still have Jeannie and Ellen. All right, chapter 2. And the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim. Bochim means they were crying. And he said, very interesting, right? In the first chapter, right? Somehow they're communicating with God. In the second chapter, now they have an angel coming. And also not clear how that works, right? But it could just be that it's not an angel. Right? Malach also means messenger, so it could be a human who is a prophet, right? And the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I made you to go up out of Egypt, and have brought you unto the land which I swore unto your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And yet ye shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. Ye shall break down their altars, but ye have not hearkened unto my voice. What is this ye have done? Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be unto you as snares, and their gods shall be a trap unto you. And it came to pass, when the angel of the Lord spoke these words unto all the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voice and wept. And they called the name of the place Bochim, and they sacrificed there unto the Lord. All right, so very interesting here, right? That the covenant, right, with God, right, doesn't only, according to this piece, right, doesn't only forbid covenants with other gods, right? It means no covenants with other peoples, which is very interesting.
Why are they weeping? Why does that cause weeping?
What causes weeping, right, is that, well, and this is actually so chapter 1 offered one version of the story. Why were there so many Canaanites left in the land? And the answer to that question in chapter 1, right, had nothing to do with worshiping other gods. It had to do with the fact that the northern tribes didn't do their job, right? They didn't banish all of the Canaanites. There were too many Canaanites left. And so ultimately what happened, right, is that they lost their land. Now this new chapter offers a different reason, right? Why did this happen? It happened, right, because, right, I will never break my covenant with you as long as you make no covenant with other people, right? But you did, right? You didn't break down their altars, right? And their gods shall be a trap to you, right? And so that's why they're crying, because they realize that the fact that they have this, that this is like a punishment, right? God is announcing basically a punishment, that they will struggle in the land rather than prosper. All right. Okay, so now we get a whole other sort of shift in perspective, because now Joshua is alive again. Right? So now when Joshua had sent the people away, the children of Israel went every man unto his inheritance to possess the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work of the Lord that he had wrought for Israel. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. So, we had this story already at the end of the book of Joshua, so we're getting it again, right, in the book of Judges, right? And they buried him at the border of his inheritance in Timnah-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, on the north of the mountain of Gaash. And also all that generation were gathered unto their fathers. And there arose another generation after them that knew not the Lord, nor yet the work which he had wrought for Israel. Right? So this is like Pharaoh, right? This is like a new Pharaoh arose over Egypt and he knew not
Not
Joseph,
Joseph.
right? And so this is the Israelites, the new generation of Israelites that knew not the Lord. It's really a powerful parallel. On the other hand, again, this is another answer to the question: why do we shift from the situation in the book of Joshua, where everything is hunky-dory between God and the Israelites, to the situation in the book of Judges, where nothing is right between between the Israelites and God, right? And this is yet another reason, right? Another reason is, the people just basically forgot. They didn't do a good job at teaching history, right? All right, now, and here's another version of it, okay? And the children of Israel did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baalim. The Baalim are the local gods, right? And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, of the gods of the peoples that were around them, and worshiped them. And they provoked the Lord, and they forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtaroth. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of the spoilers that spoiled them. And he gave them over into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had spoken, and as the Lord had sworn unto them, and they were sore distressed. And the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. And yet they hearkened not unto their judges, right? Which we saw that the book of Ruth, the Midrash on Ruth that brought this verse, right? They didn't pay attention, right? For they went astray after other gods and worshiped them. They turned aside quickly out of the way wherein their fathers walked, obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do so. And when the Lord raised them up judges, then the Lord was with the judge and saved them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groaning by reason of them that oppressed them and crushed them, right? That God would listen to their groaning, right? And God would save them, right? But it came to pass when the judge was dead that they turned back and dwelt more corruptly than their fathers in following other gods to serve them and to worship them, and left nothing undone of their practices, nor of their stubborn way. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice, I will not henceforth drive out any from before them of the nations that Joshua left when he died, that by them I may prove Israel whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk therein, as their fathers did keep it, or not. So the Lord left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered he them into the hand of Joshua. All right, so it's a bit confusing here.
Yeah.
It's a bit confusing here. All right, so the first thing to say, right, is that from about verse 11, right, from about verse 11 until verse 19. So verse 11 to verse 19 basically gives you the story of the book of Judges.
Yeah.
Who remembers the old Jewish joke? What holiday is it? It doesn't matter. They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat, right? So this is the book of Judges version of that, right? People sinned. They got conquered. They cried out. God saved them with a judge. The judge died, and it all happened again, right? It's a cyclical process, right? And interesting, as we'll see, right, that it's actually interesting that another one of these midrashim, if we have time, we'll look at it today. If not, we'll look at it next time. I don't think we'll have time today. Actually says, right, that it basically posits that Samuel and Eli, right, the priest, were actually kind of the judges of their time, right? And that they were the last judges. And so, which suggests, right, that there's a way in which there's kind of an argument among scholars. Is the book of Judges pro-monarchy, right? Or is it anti-monarchy, right? The way Samuel is, the way Deuteronomy is, or is it pro-monarchy, the way that much of the book of Samuel is, not the character Samuel.
If you take a long view, God's pretty patient with those Israelites who are always going after the other gods.
Right, right.
And that's why there had to be judges.
So right, so what Connie is saying is that that she thinks that God was being pretty patient. You know, they're constantly going after gods, and so of course they needed judges, right? But there's a kind of progression here, right? That every generation is somehow worse than the one that came before it, right? You know, they come back into line because of the judge, right? But as soon as the judge, you know, lets up his, you know, loses his lease, so to speak, right? Everybody reverts, but they don't just revert. They're even worse than they were before, you know. So each generation somehow is worse than the other. And then when we get to verse 20, it's already kind of another section, even though it's not separate in the written, in the scroll, it's not separate. Right, because now actually God is this. Now we switch, right, from the voice of the narrator, right, sort of explaining this is the cycle that the Israelites get into, to the voice of God, right, who's now, and God is explaining why didn't I get rid of all of the peoples that were in the land of Canaan before, right, and so the first answer that's given here, right, is because they transgressed the covenant, right? And so they're going to be bothered by all these people until they finally do actually follow the covenant. All right. Now the end of the introduction to the book of Judges is really here until verse 6. So we'll just read the first 6 verses of chapter 3. Now, these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them. Wait a second, here's another reason, right? It's all a test, right? It's all a test to make sure the Israelites are doing the right thing. Because if I remove all the people, right, then I'll have nothing to test them with, which of course makes no sense, because the reason that they were going to the other gods was because the other nations were there, right? So it's a bit of a mess. All right, so now these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them, even as many as had not known all the wars of Canaan. Oh, so this reason, right, is because there's going to be generations that didn't experience war, and every generation needs to have its own war. Only that the generations of the children of Israel might know to teach them war, at the least such as before time knew nothing thereof. Namely, the 5 lords of the Philistines. Oh, wait a second. But before we were told that 2 or maybe 3 of them had been destroyed, right? And all of the Canaanites, all of them, wow. And the Zidonians and the Hivites that dwelt in Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon unto the entrance of Hamath. And they were there to prove Israel by them, to know whether they would hearken unto the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. And the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. So by the end of verse 6, it seems that the Israelites have not actually driven anyone out of the land, right? They haven't put really any city to the sword, right? And they are just living among all the Canaanites.
And the Perizzites, it was said in black and white that they were driven out.
Exactly. So this is and just to sort of, and David, I don't think you were here for any of the conversation we had about the book of Joshua.
No.
So it's really important to understand that the Bible, right? The Bible is really, it's not a book of history, and it's also not a set of talking points for a particular position, right? It's not trying to be consistent, right? If the goal of the Bible were to present sort of a unitary story, a single story, so to speak, right, it would look very different than it does, right? What's important about the Bible, for the compilers of the Bible very often, right, is that preserving traditions, even ones that don't support your view of history, is more important than having a unitary narrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and so, you know, I actually think that it's one of the reasons, right, why we have, you know, in Judaism, this sort of love for endless argument, right? Because there is no end to the argument. You know, we can't necessarily say, you know, which one of these versions is the actual version, right? It's just an endless conversation.
That's why there's so much commentary.
Exactly, because it's very difficult to figure out. So whenever, and this is one of the, and we'll end here, right? But this is one of those questions that is really relevant in our day and age when we have Supreme Court justices who claim to be originalists,
Yeah.
because I don't know if they also, if originalists in constitutional terms are also sort of originalists in scriptural terms, right? But if you really study the Bible, there's you know, you can almost always find something that's going to contradict your view. I mean, this was the big issue in you know, in the fight about slavery, right? The abolitionists, they went to the Bible, right, to prove that slavery was a terrible thing. Well, all the supporters of slavery, what did they do? They went to the Bible, right, to show to show what it was a biblically mandated thing. I mean, you know, so
That's what makes it such a great book.
it is. Well, and right. That's why we can discuss it endlessly, right? And it's also why it's so frustrating when people try to use the Bible as a club, right, rather than something to really delve into. All right. So did that get any, Ellen and Jeannie? Did that get any easier as we went along?
Well, I don't see the advantage because you just had a couple of questions and I don't know what they were. I think it's just too hard for you to remember every single time to repeat it. I don't see the advantage, but maybe you have an advantage. Maybe.
Well, I think, I mean, basically, it's an effort to reduce isolation. So we're presented with a situation where we have, I think, multiple priorities that are a little bit in not quite conflict, but they're not necessarily, it's not necessarily going to work perfectly. So let me try one other thing. So the way I did it this way, the way I did it today was that I trained the camera on me, right? I can also train the camera on the group. So let me do that just for a moment and see what you think. I don't know if it's gonna work, actually.
Far apart. Not gonna work.
Yeah, we might be just too far apart for that.
I think
Yeah.
you
Yeah, can't see anybody.
Now you can't see it, right? Yeah, that's right.
Now the camera's not going to make it. It's not a wide angle or anything. And then we're not going to see you, you mean?
Well, no, I mean, so the thing is that eventually we're gonna have proper equipment for video conferences in these rooms, so that the camera will be up next to the television. We'll all sit in a square. I can have my computer and I don't have to have my camera connected to my computer. That's the problem, is that these cameras are really only meant
Yeah,
for the person who's right in front of the computer. They're not meant for a room. So when we have a room camera, it should work a lot better. And then also when I have a better microphone, then that microphone will pick up the voices of everybody in the room, not just my voice. And that way you'll be able to hear the
yeah,
question.
that would be helpful because I don't think that you can remember every single time
No,
to repeat
well,
the question.
I mean, it's also practice. It's also, I mean, it's also just practice, but thank you for putting up with the bumps. I know it's not easy.
Well, it's not easy for you.
We're gonna keep on, you know, climbing that
Yeah,
ladder.
we've come a long way. I remember the Seder, I guess in April.
Oh my God. That was
We
a
didn't know about muting and stuff, and so that
Seder
was
Seder-
cacophony. So we come a long way since the Seder.
Yes, well, I'll
Since
tell
we
you.
left
what-
Egypt, we've come a long way.
Exactly. We're sitting in sukkahs now. But what was crazy about the Seder was that I had my kid there to work the computer. And in the middle of the Seder, he just fell asleep.
Too much wine.
Yes, I don't know what happened. So all of a sudden it was like, he's not doing it anymore.
Did it make a difference, really? I don't know.
So anyway, so then all of a sudden I was working the computer and leading the thing at the same time. I was like, oh, this is actually easier to do it myself than to tell Moses what to do. So it's actually, so.
But you'll be at 100 one of these days.
So next Monday, I'll be at Cohen for Soul Search at 1:30. And then next Wednesday, I'll be at Dinesh for Jewish Learning. So yeah. So you'll have your chance, Jeannie, to come down if
I
you
don't
want,
know. I don't know. I may stay here.
or come up. We'll see what happens. We'll see what, it's gonna be, it's gonna be,
An aliyah. You think a lot of people are gonna make an aliyah?
exactly. It's gonna be, there are gonna be growing pains galore, but hopefully we'll get there. So
All right, well, we made it.
we made it
Made
through.
it today.
Made it through.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Jeannie. See you soon.
Thank you.